Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining as always. I've muted everyone as per the normal format, but please feel free to unmute yourselves if you wish to ask anything or say anything. And we'll have our normal structure of half an hour of Parsha followed by half an hour of Halacha. Apologies for the slightly late start. I had minor technological issues, internet issues, but I hope they're resolved. So I wanted to learn the section of the Parsha in which Avram sends his servant Eliezer as a shliach, a messenger, an agent, to choose an appropriate wife for Yitzchak. And there's a lot to say on this very fascinating episode, but I really just want to focus on one aspect of the story, which is Avram's instructions about who is or who is not an appropriate shidduch, an appropriate match for Yitzchak. So let's just look straight away at the sheet that I gave out. We have several psukim to learn. And the psukim begin with Avram Zokein Bar Bayomim. This is Perek Kaf Daled, Pasuk Aleph. Avram Zokein Bar Bayomim. In fact, maybe I'll just post on the chat group the link, the email, the link for the download in case anyone didn't get the handout. I'll just put that on the chat group. Forgive the delay. See if that worked. Yeah, so I'll put that on the chat group in case anyone didn't have it. Avram Zokein Bar Bayomim, V'Hashem Be'achas Avram B'Kol. Avram was old. Bar Bayomim, this is not the focus of the shiur, but Bar Bayomim is one of these interesting expressions. It's a little bit unclear how to translate it. He was old, and Bar Bayomim, he had come in days, come with days. Either it means he's approaching his end, or it means Bar Bayomim, he came with the experience of age. In other words, he had an accomplished life, full of life's experiences, full days. He came with his days. This is how Chazal understand the expression. We find this expression of Bar Bayomim only used with great figures, and they understand that whilst anyone can be Zokein, old, only an Avraham Avinu and his ilk can be Bar Bayomim, full of days, coming accomplished with their days. Vashem Beirach as Avram Bakol, Hashem blessed Avram with everything. In benching, we indicate Bakol Mikol Kol. We ask Hashem to give us the bracha of Bakol Mikol Kol, using the language of Kol ascribed to each of the three of us, Bakol Mikol Kol, and contrasted by Chazal to the language used by Esav, in which he says Yeshli Rov. So whilst Esav says I have plenty, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are all described as, or describe themselves as having kol, having everything, and it's seen by Chazal as a statement of a frame of mind. When the pasuk says Hashem Beirach as Avram Bakol, no one can be blessed with everything. No one can possibly have everything. So when the pasuk says Avram has kol, it can only be from his perspective. If it literally means he has over here. Does he really have everything in the universe? Is it possible for him to have everything in the universe? Bakol means his mindset is that he has everything. The pasuk then carries on. Vayomer Avram el Avdoi Zakan Beisoi Hamoshel B'Chol Hashaloi. Avram says to his servant, the elder of his house, who ruled over everything, Simna Yodcha Tachas Yerechi. Put your hands under my thigh. Now, it doesn't say who this servant is. The servant who goes and acts as Avram's representative in choosing the match for Yitzchak is anonymous throughout the story. Earlier in the Torah, we're told about Avram having a Damesek Beiso, someone who is the manager of his household called Eliezer. And Chazal link this Eved and assume that this Eved is Eliezer, the earlier servant of Avram. We don't know much about who Eliezer was, but that's how Chazal understand it. And they make an interesting diuk in the pasuk. They see Eliezer as an extraordinarily righteous person because it says that Eliezer was Moshel B'Chol Hashaloi. He ruled over everything that was his, i.e. everything that was Avram's. So Eliezer was in complete control of all of Avram's property. Now, if Eliezer was a servant or a slave of Avram, it meant he was also part of Avram's property. In which case Eliezer was in complete control of all of Avram's property, including himself, i.e. he was in complete control of himself. So Chazal see this as an extraordinary description of this servant. Clearly he's a remarkable man. Which of us can say that we are Moshel, that we rule over, are in complete control of ourselves? So this is Eliezer who's Moshel b'chol hashaloi. Now why does he say, Simla yodcha tachas yirechi, put your hand under my thigh? What is this action? So Rashi, well, clearly in the context of the pasuk, it's a method of making a shavua, a promise, because the next pasuk says, "Vashpiacha b'Hashem Elokei Hashemayim." I make you swear in the name of Hashem, the God of heaven, v'Elokei ha'aretz, asher lo tikach isha livni mibenos haknani, asher anochi yoshev b'kibur, that you won't take a wife for my son from the native inhabitants of Canaan, but kiyim el artzi, you'll go to my birthplace, etc. So this is an introduction to an oath, to a promise, placing the hand under the thigh. Rashi understands that the symbolism of this act is an association with the most recent and precious mitzvah that Avram had been given, the mitzvah of bris milah, and therefore this is linking to covenant and the bris and an object of sanctity, and tying in an oath to the infinite, to the absolute. An oath in Torah is always in the name of Hashem. For example, in this pasuk, Vashpiach Hashem, one ties an oath into something of spirituality, something of kedusha, something of absolute existence, and therefore it ties into the Makkeh BePatish. The Ibn Ezra doesn't believe this is correct. He says this isn't the correct reading. The next pasuk says that the oath is done in the name of Hashem. Rather, he says this is a symbol of authority and subjugation. If you put your hands under someone's thigh, you recognize in a sense that they can tread on you, that they are in charge of you. And that's the symbolism of the oath. Someone is accepting authority. We know actually that this method of oath-taking is one that was used in the ancient world, which would suggest, at least a possible reading of Pshuto Shel Mikra, like the Ibn Ezra, unlike Rashi, that this isn't a particularly Jewish way of swearing or making an oath. This isn't unique to Avram, but this is a general way of making a promise. Now, what is the promise? As we just saw in Pasuk Gimel, Pasuk Daled, the promise is that you will not go to hunt a wife for Yitzchak, to seek out a wife for Yitzchak from Benois HaKnani Asher Anochi Yoshev B'Kiboi, the daughters of Canaan in whose midst I dwell, but rather you will go and seek a wife in Ki Em El Artzi Ve'el Moladati Selich. You will seek a wife who is in my land and my birthplace. And of course, we know that's the continuation of the story, that in the end, Rivka, the daughter of Besuel, the sister of Lavan, is chosen as the wife for Yitzchak. Now, why not? Why not Mibenois Canaan? And why not Asher Anochi Yoshev B'Kiboi? Are these two issues? Are these one issue? Is this one issue? Kanani, Asher Anochi Yoshev B'Kiboi. What's the source of Avram's concern? So there's a number of Mefarshim that discuss this. And the reason this is interesting is twofold. First of all, this is clearly something Avram takes seriously. He is absolutely determined that Yitzchak should not find his shidduch from the Benois Canaan. And this is something that Avram belabors. The second difficulty is that Avram is someone who seems to interact with the Bnei Canaan. After all, he is striding up and down the length and breadth of what at the time is still Eretz Canaan. Vayikra b'shem Hashem, he calls in the name of Hashem. Who is he calling to? He's calling to the natives, to the inhabitants, to the Canaanites. So if Avram is this outreach figure, why exactly does he object to Yitzchak marrying Mibenois Canaan from the daughters of Canaan? And indeed, in the language of Chazal, even objecting to him marrying great figures who are around him. There are Eliezer, the servant of Avram, who Moshel b'chol hashaloi seems to be someone close to Avram, who is ruling over everything Avram has. He's a Kambei, so he's the elder of the house. And then Avram has his friends, Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre, amongst whom he lives, as described in previous Sedras. So clearly some of these would appear to be acquaintances, colleagues, partners with Avram on his unique mission. And nonetheless, I am unwilling, says Avram, to allow my daughter to marry them. So the Radak, Reb David Kimchi, brings one answer, a traditional answer to this question based on the Medrash. Mibenos HaKnani, ki zera Knan oror, v'zari baruch. This is source talk 2. The Zerah of Canaan, the descendants of Canaan, are cursed, and I am blessed. I don't want there to be a mixture between the Zerah Baruch, the blessed seed of Avram, with Oro, with the seed that is cursed of Canaan. So this is tying back to the history of Canaan, the story of Canaan with Noach, and therefore there's something incompatible with Noach and Canaan and Avram managing to make a connection. Any individual can draw close to Hashem. Vayikra b'shem Hashem. Avram sees it as worthwhile to draw these people to monotheism, to serve Hashem. They can become great individuals in their own right. They can become an Eliezer or an Honor Eshkol and Mamre. Nonetheless, the founding of Klal Yisrael has to take place between people who are Baruch, who have a bracha relationship with Hashem, not those who are Oro. In other words, in the Radak's reading, the Medrash reading, this is part of a general pattern in the Torah, in which egalitarianism isn't something that Torah really seems to subscribe to. Being equal is one of these nice catchphrases that doesn't really mean that much and needs a lot of unpicking. It makes a good sticker for the back of the car. All human beings are equal, but good stickers don't make good philosophy. And when we say equality, we need to unpick what exactly that means. If we mean by equality that all people are equal, well, clearly this is factually incorrect. We mean in every sense they are equal. Some people are richer, some are poorer, some are more talented, some are less talented, some are more intelligent, less intelligent, longer lifespan, shorter lifespan, more healthy, less healthy. Humans are different. So if we mean that we ascribe or aspire towards a society in which there's complete equality in that sense, it would need to create a society of the extremes in which all human beings would have to live in an extreme communist life of complete confiscation of any property, probably in terms of health and intelligence. The only way to ensure equality would be, and longevity for that matter, would be the lowest common denominator, in which all humans were made equal by reducing all of us to the least healthy, least intelligent, least charismatic individual. So if that's what we mean by equality, this isn't a situation of equality. If we mean by equality in things that matter, which is the possibility of drawing close to Hashem and building a real relationship with Him, in that sense, yes, we ascribe to equality. Anyone can draw and build a real relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and achieve even nevuah. Nonetheless, in the methods of serving Hashem, we each have our own mission and our own role. Kohanim, Leviim, male, female. If egalitarianism means a fight against the possibility of the halachic system distinguishing between the routes towards serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this simply isn't in line with the model the Torah seems to create. And therefore, in this reading of the Radak, based upon the Midrashic reading, Canaan is simply not a figure who can form Klal Yisrael. An individual amongst Canaan can achieve a closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every human being can have a chelek in Olam Haba, can have a portion in the world to come, can have a deep and meaningful spiritual connection to Hashem. But Canaan is Oror, cannot form Klal Yisrael, the particular qualities needed for the nation that has been tasked with bringing the rest of the world back to a direct connection with Hashem. So this is how the Radak reads the Psukim. One version of understanding. The Chizkuni in source 3 has a very different reading. I don't think in this forum we've quoted the Chizkuni before, so I'll just mention a little bit about him. His name was Chizkiah ben Manoach. He was a 13th century figure. He was either French, as in North French, in other words, part of the tradition of the Ashkenazi Baalei Tosfos, or South French, provincial, in which case he came from the community of Provence, which was its own tradition. It was neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardi. It's a tradition that died out, but it was its own communal Masorah, its own tradition. And he wrote what's called a super commentary, in other words, a commentary on a commentary. He wrote a commentary or expanded version of Rashi. So he bases himself somewhat round the Perush, the commentary of Rashi, but adds in details and nuance in Rashi, and also adds in his own explanations. He writes actually very interestingly in this is an aside, in the Hakdama of his commentary, he writes that he writes the Perush in memory of his father, Kibbutz Kas Ovi, in memory of my father, Hikdir Lelokei Ha'ivrim Yad Yeminoi, who sacrificed his right hand to Hashem, the God of the Ivrim, or the God of the Jews. And it's very unclear what exactly the Chizkuni means by this. Does he mean quite literally that his father sacrificed his right hand? In other words, was somehow forced, perhaps in an attempted forced conversion or assimilation situation, to sacrifice quite literally his right hand, rather than effectively be martyred, semi-martyred in the name of Hashem? Or is this some sort of metaphor in which he gave up all his power and abilities in the service of Hashem? It's not clear. There's some evidence that the Chizkuni meant this literally, though we don't know exactly the story behind this. So the Chizkuni, either way, wrote a very beautiful Perush on the Torah, and in source 3 he gives a different explanation. Mibnois haKanani, from the daughters of Canaan, pen yomru alai, lest they say about me, al yedei Yerusha umatana nichnasu la'aretz, through inheritance and gift he entered the land. Lefichach eini roitza ele al yedei HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'et nenali b'chazaka. Therefore, I don't want the Torah, the land, to be given to me through any other method other than the one which is transparent, that this came as a gift directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, I don't want Yitzchak to be connected to Canaan, to the original inhabitants of Eretz Canaan. Very interesting explanation. This is a pattern we see in Avram's life, in which he doesn't want to take gifts from others and achieve wealth from them. We see this in his interaction with the king of Sodom, who wants to reward him for the battle and the rescue of the 5 kings from the hands of the 4 kings. And Avram says, I won't take I won't even take a thread or a shoelace from you. We see this when he buys Ma'oras HaMachpelah from Ephron. He wants to pay good money for it, he doesn't want it gifted from Ephron. And Chizkuni sees this as part of that pattern. In the stress of the Chizkuni, it's B'noi Saknani, Asher Anochi Yoshu B'Keboi. These are the people who live here. These are the native inhabitants of the land. I don't want anyone to think that our relationship to Eretz Yisrael is because we are descendants of the Canaanim. Had Yitzchak married a Canaanite person, then we, as Klal Yisrael, would have been continuation of the original inhabitants of the land. Avram doesn't want that. He wants it to be clear that Eretz Yisrael has been gifted to him in a supernatural manner, as a direct act of divine intervention, as a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, rather than something given by inheritance from the Canaani. This is the Chizkuni's answer. The Kliyaka, Reb Shlomo Ephraim Lunshitz, gives another explanation, and I'd really just like to learn through what the Kliyaka in a very beautiful Perush says on this. And this is source 4 over here. And the Kliyaka, in his first answer, says that Lo sikach isha livni mibnoi saknani asher nochi yoshev b'keboi. He puts the stress on asher nochi yoshev b'keboi, the fact that I am dwelling amongst them. Ask the Kliyaka, v'chiyadain lo yadanu shu yoshev b'keboi. Why can't Avram just say, don't make a shidduch with the Canaanite? Why say asher nochi yoshev b'keboi, that I'm living amongst them? Ela shabala tarit b'zeh kushya. He's coming to answer a question. He didn't just say don't dwell amongst the Canaanites, or the reason he said not to dwell amongst the Canaanites is unless he learns, my child Yitzchak learns, or my descendants learn from their ways. Don't, the Torah in Devarim says when you enter the land of Israel, don't marry them because you will be drawn away after their practices. What does Yitzchak gain by marrying a daughter of Lavan and Besuel? They also worshippers of Avodah Zarah like the Canaanites. Therefore, Avram stresses, the point is I'm living here. And also he said, don't take my son over there. So what the Kliyaka is explaining in a very beautiful explanation is that, of course, Avram's family in distant Choron are no better than the Canaanites. They're also Ovdei Avodah Zarah. They're also idol worshippers. But the point is, they're over here, they're over there, they're not over here. If Yitzchak marries a Canaanite who is an Ovdei Avodah Zarah, who is an idol worshipper, he's living in a society immersed close by with his pagan relatives. That's dangerous, says Avram. If he marries a daughter of Lavan or Besuel, he'll bring his wife back here to Eretz Yisrael. He won't be linked through connection of marriage to his neighbors. And that way, Rivka and Yitzchak will be able to set up an independent home, free of the influence of the surroundings. And therefore, this is a better match. And the Kli Yakar brings evidence for this from the last pasuk, which I put in the handout on the source sheet, a pasuk 6, in which Avraham, we often forget this in the story, he didn't just make Eliezer make a promise to take a daughter from his family back in Haran, but he also said, don't leave Yitzchak there. The terms of the shidduch cannot be that Yitzchak will move in with his in-laws there in Haran. The terms of the shidduch has to be that the young lady has to move back to Eretz Yisrael, to live with Yitzchak in Eretz Yisrael. Now, there's many reasons given to why Avraham insisted on this, including Chazal, who say it's because Yitzchak is an Olah, he's a sacrifice, he's been brought up in the Akedah, he's too holy to live in Chutz La'aretz, etc. But that's not the Kli Yakar's understanding of it. The Kli Yakar says the point Avraham wants is that he wants Yitzchak to live away from the in-laws. He doesn't want Yitzchak to live in close proximity to the family that he marries into. And therefore, he can't marry a Canaanite, because then they will be close by. Therefore, my relatives back in Haran are just as terrible as the Canaanites. They're no better. However, I can at least insist that then Yitzchak and Rivka live near me, and that way they'll be away from that family. And this brings out a number of points. First of all, it makes us aware of the advantage of being a minority when we are living in Golus. Being conscious of being an Ivri, something I spoke about last week, being conscious of being different to the surroundings, having a different outlook, a different perspective is no bad thing. It allows us to question rather than just take on board the assumptions of society. It makes us think about identity and how we connect. And Avraham, who is the great outreach figure, nonetheless is conscious that being that doesn't mean that one should be immersed and submerged in it. Yiddishkeit isn't just a halachic system, it isn't just a set of rules, it's also a culture, it's a lifestyle, it's a way of being. We can talk a little differently, we can move a little differently, we can culturally enjoy slightly different things because we are meant to have an ability to have a separate identity. The criteria and the tools that we use to assess situations can be a little different and can be in line with our own values. I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but at this point in time, there's a lot of discussion around communal response to COVID, to the challenges of a pandemic and other such things. I don't think our community is always getting it right. I think that sometimes, as I spoke about in my Dinah Malchusa share, Dinah Malchusa is a halacha, and we need to be part of society in that context. But the raw idea that we question and we think, and that we have another framework or algorithm through which we want to process decisions that need to be made, is a good thing. It allows us to think critically about society. It's only through the ability to question and think differently that actually change can be made and one can approach things in a different angle. So this is the first point. The second point is that Avraham is scared. He's nervous about the influence. Why is Avraham scared? After all, surely he is the great kiruv worker. He's the one who reaches out and constantly communicates. And the answer is that one can only do that once one has built a home which is firm and secure in its differences. And therefore, this is the second point that the Kli Yakar is making. Here, we're not talking about Yitzchak's relationship to outside society. Avraham is absolutely open to reaching out. However, the home that Yitzchak builds has to be a home that's secure in its values. It's secure and knows what it is and doesn't have compromise. And therefore, again, this is the limits to Avraham's tolerance. Reach out, absolutely yes, but when it comes to building the home, that is someone who is within, not someone who is going to draw or threaten to draw Yitzchak away from his background. So this is the first answer to the Kli Yakar. The second answer to the Kli Yakar is a very famous answer. I don't know why this answer has become more famous than the other. We're not going to have time to read it inside, but the Kli Yakar says that Avraham is scared of the materialism of the Canaanite culture. Avraham's family isn't perfect. They are Ovdei Avodah Zarah. They are pagans, they are idol worshippers. However, the Canaanites, it's a decadent culture. It's a culture of indulgence, of lack of discipline. It's hedonistic. It's into physicality. There's an animal-like nature about it. And this is more dangerous in Avraham's mind. This is something that can really mold and form and impact the nature of his descendants of Yitzchak. And this is more scary to Avram than philosophical or theological errors, that at least you're talking to human beings. There's someone there to talk to, someone who is a functioning, healthy human being, who has values, who has a vision to their life, who has purpose, who has direction, who is able to achieve and set themselves goals. Okay, they're making philosophical errors, they're pagans, but I can deal with that, says Avram, I can handle it. However, if the raw material is broken, if there's an animalistic nature to it, if it's hedonistic, if it's raw materialistic physicality, with a lack of discipline, with a lack of focus, with a laziness, with an indulgence, that says Avram, there's no one to talk to. And therefore, I prefer to take a wife from the pagan culture of my family, where at least the mistake made is that of mind and theology, rather than the materialistic decadence of Canaanite culture, where I don't feel there's anyone to talk to at all. And therefore, he prefers a shidduch with the Choronites, albeit the pagans, rather than with the Canaanites, some of whom maybe Avram has influenced to monotheism, but are so lacking in a meaning and a purpose and the tools needed for that. Now, this answer of the Kli Yakar is often simplified, in which the distinction made is that between good and bad midos, character traits on the one hand, and on the other hand, mistakes of hashkafa and belief on the other. However, this isn't quite so simple. Midos is an interesting word. Midah, personality traits, are an interesting word. Lavan himself doesn't have such a great quality of personality. Lavan is a trickster. He's a terrible liar and hypocrite. We see this in his interaction with, in many interactions, including his double dealing with Yaakov, the Rachel Leah story, and the whole continuation of the Parsha, which we're not going to have time to read, and not in this week's Sedra, but in Vayetze, where we see his sheer brazen hypocrisy in how he speaks about himself. And what this seems to indicate in the Kli Yakar's understanding is that dishonesty may not be, or primarily is not, a flaw in raw material, in physicality. It's a mistake in seichel, in thought. And I find this very, very interesting. The bias and the agenda that leads someone to dishonesty, of course, is often something drawing them of physical nature, materialism, a desire to enjoy perhaps life in a manner incompatible with the truth, and therefore to lie. Nonetheless, lying ends up as a perversion of thought and perspective. In fact, there are thinkers that say that the reason why Lavan is referred to as Lavan, as white, is because he is a completely transparent figure. He could pass a lie detector test. The accuracy of lie detectors, or not, as an aside, but the concept behind them is that when someone tells a lie, they feel an internal conflict and tension. Lavan feels no tension whatsoever. He is comfortable in his lies through and through. He is a pure liar, with no tension whatsoever, because perhaps he has lied to such a degree where he's even convinced himself of what he is saying. He's completely comfortable with his distorted version of reality. And therefore, in the Kli Yakar's model, the dishonesty of Lavan is perhaps a midah, a character trait failing, but it is one of mind rather than just sheer unbridled animalistic physicality, which is what terrifies Avram. So there's an insight in this into honesty and its relationship in Avram's thinking between where it fits in. Avram says, I can deal with mistakes of mind. I can even deal with the dishonesty of a Lavan. However, what I can't handle is someone who has just descended into unthinking animalism. That can't be handled. A dishonest person, at least, is a thinking person. Flawed, dangerous, needs to be dealt with, but nonetheless, that's something that we can address. David posted quite accurately in the chat that this ties up very much with Eliezer choosing a girl who showed chesed, though she was a family of Avodah. Indeed, that is the continuation of the story, and part of why this was the test that Eliezer set in his mission statement, because he understood this is what mattered to Avram. He was looking for the character traits, but could deal with hashkafa. But again, to stress, this isn't just midos, but this is raw materialism and unbridled materialism that scares Avram more than just character traits in general. So we'll stop there in the Parsha, the thoughts for the Parsha, and move over to speaking about some halacha. And we were in the middle of the very, very important and fascinating halacha of Makkeh BePatish. Again, I can't stress enough how relevant these halachas are on day-to-day life. This isn't a halacha which is an abstract one. This is one that absolutely and categorically has practical application. So let's just spend a few moments talking, using the next half an hour, talking about the malacha of Makkeh BePatish. Makkeh BePatish, to remind you, is the last hammer blow. I don't want to go into detail of the definition again. We discussed this in the last two shiurim. However, Makkeh BePatish is completing or finishing something off, making something, bringing something back into functionality, whether that's through a new creation, whether that's through a repair of something broken, or even an improvement in some situations. All of these are Makkeh BePatish. Many malachas are involved with creating something new, taking dough and baking it into bread, taking threads and weaving them into cloth, taking cloth and sewing it into garments, building. All of these are creating something new. However, Makkeh BePatish is when it is none of the other malachas, even if it doesn't involve any other malacha. There's no malacha in blowing up a leather flat pack ball into a football. Nonetheless, since it completes it and it brings it into functionality, that is the malacha of Makkeh BePatish. So I'd like today to try and speak about two main common scenarios, and then use the remaining time to speak about as many other scenarios as we have time to fit in. And hopefully next week, we'll look at some of the Drabonon extensions of Makkeh BePatish. Again, these are, Makkeh BePatish is perhaps one of the most common malachas of which one is unaware and yet impacts heavily on Shabbos. So let's talk about, I think, the broken glasses scenario. I think I left that off at the end of last week. One's glasses break or the lens pops out. What can one do on Shabbos? That is one halacha I want to speak about. And then I was asked after shiur last time to speak about bottle tops and containers, opening cans of tuna and cans of Coke, and unscrewing lids on Shabbos, and trying to bring some clarity to what is quite a confusing area of halacha. So let's talk for a few minutes about glasses, broken glasses on Shabbos. And this involves potentially Makkeh BePatish in fixing them, but it is complicated by two drabonons that were created. The first rabbinic legislation is as follows. If I take my lens, let's say my lens has popped out of the glasses, or indeed a broom handle has come out of the head of the broom, the brush of the broom, and I want to screw it back in. This would be pure Makkeh BePatish. This would be the malacha of Makkeh BePatish, quite probably a deraisa, a Torah transgression, because I'm screwing it back in. I'm permanently fixing something which is normally left for a long time. A permanent reattachment of something which is broken and it isn't normal functionality to open and close it would be the Torah prohibition of Makkeh BePatish. So I certainly can't screw the screw back in to fix the glasses. What happens if I just want to loosely twist the screw a little bit in a manner which is not really tightly attached, and therefore the Torah prohibition shouldn't apply in this case? So this is known in halacha as a gezerah d'Rabbanan of shema yitzka, in case one tightens it. So even a loose reattachment is forbidden in a case where the normal thing to be would be to continue tightening it to make it completely tightened. Very intuitive drabbanon to even loosely attach it, where the normal thing, and I add that proviso with care, is to continue to tighten it. There would be a gezerah, a drabbanon, not to even loosely attach it, shema yitzka. They then created a second drabbanon. It's fascinating how seriously they took this malacha, in which they imposed muktzah on the broken pieces in order to keep one away from this. The particular way they described this muktzah was in the case of a kira, a oven, a stove, where one of the legs became detached, and they created a muktzah to say you can neither move the stove, nor the base of the stove, nor the detached legs. And this is therefore known as gezeras kira, the gezerah, the rabbinic legislation of an oven, of a stove. So that's the name given to it, even though it's got nothing to do with the stove in general. It's just one example. But this is a muktzah created on the broken part. Now, a few limitations to this halacha, which mean that one always has to think quite carefully about the situation. The first is neither the gezerah nor the muktzah was made on Yom Tov. they were conscious that these rules had the ability to severely impact on Simchas Yom Tov, and therefore, since they wanted Yom Tov to be a day of Simcha, they didn't create these Drabonans on Yom Tov. That's the first point. The second point is they only created these Drabonans where it was possible to reattach in a forbidden way the broken components. However, if it was impossible to reattach them because they are literally broken, like snapped, or the screw has gone missing or something of the sort, then these gezeras wouldn't apply. The gezeras weren't to forbid a loose reattachment. They were to forbid a loose reattachment where the natural and normal thing would be to continue to attach it and repair it properly. But if a full repair isn't possible, then that wouldn't apply. Second limitation. Third limitation, if one has got into the habit of using it broken, again, they weren't concerned that you would mess up and therefore it'd be okay. So if one's glasses or the stove is constantly breaking, or one's got into the habit of walking around with the stem missing off one side of the glasses because you haven't even got around to going to the optician to fix it, in that case, it wouldn't be muktzah because you've shown that you're dealing with the broken implement and aren't automatically slipping into fixing it. So this is the set of regulations, the principles which they're going to use to apply to our glasses scenario. So just going through them one by one. Am I allowed to screw the little screw in the glasses to reattach the lens firmly and tightly? No, everyone would agree not. That would be Makkeh BePatish. Can it be inserted in loosely without tightening it? The answer would be on Shabbos, no, because of the gezerah that one will tighten it completely. On Yom Tov, it is allowed. If this is the first time it has happened to one, and normally they've been absolutely fine, would the muktzah drabanan apply? Again, the answer would be on Shabbos, yes. On Yom Tov, no. Sorry, on Yom Tov, it's allowed. On Shabbos, it would be muktzah. However, the other principles would apply. The muktzah and the drabanan only applies if one might be tempted to fix it. If the glasses are unfixable, the screw is snapped or the screw is lost, then the gezerah wouldn't apply because we're not worried about you misusing, accidentally finishing off the act of repair, and therefore wouldn't apply. So similarly, if one's worn the glasses previously in a broken state, then again the gezerah, the drabanan of wouldn't apply because one has demonstrated that one has become used to using them without slipping into the temptation of immediately repairing them. So to summarize, glasses broken on Yom Tov, one can loosely reattach them and loosely put the screw in. Glasses broken on Shabbos, one can't loosely put the screw in. And indeed, if it's the first time it ever happens on Shabbos and the break is easily fixable, one wouldn't even be able to wear them because they would be muktzah. If it's not easily fixable, for example, it's a proper break or the screw has gone missing, or if one has got used to wearing them broken, the drabonans don't apply. Chazal were conscious not to overly inconvenience us and therefore didn't create the drabonans. In such a case where muktzah doesn't apply, can one fix them through a temporary method like putting a piece of wire or a pin in? And the answer is yes, one could do so because this is just a temporary fix. As long as one doesn't intend to leave it like that and after Shabbos one will remove the pin, this would be allowed if it's not muktzah. In other words, if in a scenario where muktzah doesn't apply. Finally, what happens if the lens has merely popped out but the screw is still in place? The answer is there is one can pop it back in because this is an easy fix. It's unskilled and it's not going to last long. Glasses where the lens has popped out, it means that it's gone very slightly loose. It's expanded a bit the metal or the thread of the screw has worn away, and therefore it's going to pop out on a more regular occasion. And therefore, even though there's some discussion around this, the consensus of poskim is that this is not Makkeh BePatish because one is merely doing a simple act of clicking them back in with no specific tightening and in a manner in which it is likely that it will break again. So this is the application of Makkeh BePatish to the scenario of glasses. Let's now try and apply the concept of Makkeh BePatish to the thorny issue of opening containers on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And here, it took me a long time to prepare this topic. I'll try and make what is a very complicated halachic matter as simple as possible and also try and draw some practical halachic conclusions. And the reason it's complicated is because really this is an alignment of many different isurim all mixed in one. There are cases where through opening the container, you are actually creating the container. and therefore the relevant malacha is Makkeh BePatish, completing something which is our topic. However, there are many other malachas relevant over here. There's potentially korea, tearing. There's potentially moichik, if we erase lettering in doing it. There's mechateich, which is cutting. And there's soisa, which is destroying. Because when you open a container, you might be making the container, you might be destroying the container. You may be tearing through writing, in which case it would be moichik, it would be erasing writing, or maybe cutting it down to a specific size, which would be mechateich, the malacha of tearing. Cutting rather. In addition, there is the malacha of korea, which is tearing, which is when one isn't cutting it down to a specific size, but intending to reattach it. And finally, as I said, there's our topic, Makkeh BePatish. There could be Makkeh BePatish through completing the utensil, bringing utensil into existence. And there could be another Makkeh BePatish, which is creating an opening, which would be an improvement of a utensil. If you have a utensil and you create a spout or a pouring area, that might be Makkeh BePatish because you're increasing the utility of the utensil. If you have a utensil which is sealed and you open it, then that might be Makkeh BePatish because you're making it into a utensil in the first instance. So there's lots of malachas floating around over here, and this is what makes the sugya, the topic, a little complicated. So let's just, in a sense, dispose of the easier malachas over here. Let's start with moichik, erasing. So we discussed moichik because we spoke the previous series of halachas. We discussed Chayei, writing, and moichik on Shabbos. And I explained that tearing through lettering is moichik, and one should attempt to avoid, when opening, tearing through the lettering. If one will definitely tear through the letters themselves, through break letter themselves, not separate between letters, but within the letter itself, break a letter in half, this would be forbidden. If one is attempting to avoid tearing the letters, even though it is difficult to do and it may prove the case that you accidentally tear through the lettering, in that case one doesn't need to worry. There are enough reasons why this moichik is a minor moichik. You don't have intention to rewrite, you have no intention to tear the lettering, you have no interest in tearing the lettering. It's a side consequence of what one is doing, and therefore as long as this is inevitable, you have no interest in it, it would be allowed to do. So that's the issue of tearing. However, the more thorny problems are those of Makkeh BePatish, creating utensils. So let's just go through some of the principles over here. The first principle is based on a Tosefta. A Tosefta is a collection of statements from the Tanoim. The Mishnaic era Rabbonim taught many halachas. The most prominent collection of halachas that was compiled was that by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, which we know as Mishnah. However, there were other collections of Tanaitic statements, including one compiled by the nephew of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Chia, known as the Tosefta. So this Tosefta is a compilation of statements of Mishnaic Rabbonim, and in the Tosefta, the following halacha is taught. The halacha says one can rip a skin, a skin off the top of a barrel, on Shabbos in order to use the barrel. Now, there's a lot that is unclear about what this Tosefta is saying. However, the consensus understanding of this is in one of two forms. Either you can rip the skin off the top of the barrel because it is destroyed by so doing, in which case the Tosefta is teaching us that you can open a utensil on Shabbos, even though you are creating a utensil by so doing that, if it is destroyed in the process. So let's think about an example of this. Let's talk about a can of Coke. So when you open a can of Coke, you could argue that you are creating a utensil. You're creating a functioning, usable container. Now you may say to me, well, surely the can of Coke was already a container. It was storing Coke. And that is true. However, it was inaccessible. It was sealed. By pulling off the tab, I am now opening the can of Coke and making it into a open utensil which can now be used. And therefore, arguably, you are making a utensil by so doing. Let's go with that argument, that suggestion that you are making a utensil by so doing. So if that would be a concern, one allowance would be if in the process of opening, you also destroy it. So if you open it in a manner which is destructive, then that would be allowed. So with a can of Coke, perhaps that's a little more difficult to do, but with a tin of tuna, You could, for example, open the top and the bottom, and that way you haven't created a utensil, you're immediately ruining it as you open it, and therefore this would be allowed. So this would be one leniency if you destroy it in the process of opening it. The second way of learning this Tosefta is that since the skin covering the barrel is almost like a peel, any utensil which is flimsy and almost like a peel of a fruit wouldn't be in the prohibition of Makkeh BePatish of creating a utensil by opening it up. And therefore, if one has, for example, the wrapper of a chocolate bar, I mean not a proper big chocolate bar, a small bar that you just sort of peel off this very flimsy wrapper, and it's normal that it's discarded as soon as you peel it off. This would be allowed because it's not creating a utensil of significance, it's really merely removing the cover. So this is a second allowance with creating utensils, if they are either flimsy and like a skin or a peel, or if they are ruined through the process of opening. There is a third argument to be put forward, that the whole shiur doesn't start with cans of tins at all, because they are already utensils. What is a utensil? Something that's containing something. They contain tuna, they contain Coke. So how can you argue that by opening them, you are making them into a utensil? Surely they are already utensils and you are merely opening a pre-existing utensil. So this is the source of the variety of practices you've probably met or heard, depending on which Rav people follow, as to how one should paskin with opening cans of Coke or tins of tuna. You may have heard people who say it's not a concern at all, no problem whatsoever. They are of the opinion that either opening such a container isn't creating a container because it already stores food, and therefore the whole shiur never started, or since the way of using these containers is to immediately discard them, as soon as the contents of this can of Coke or the tin of tuna are emptied out, you'll discard them. This is like a wrapper rather than a significant, genuine utensil being created, and therefore there isn't a problem. You may, on the other hand, know people who will always destroy the can of tuna in the process of opening it. For example, they will open half the lid and pull it back, and then also use the tin opener to open the bottom and pull that back, and that way you haven't created a utensil at all. They are following the more stringent view, that is of the opinion that A, since I am opening it, I'm creating a utensil by so doing it, and B, since these are not flimsy but are hard, the leniency of the wrapper wouldn't apply, and therefore these shouldn't be opened unless one destroys them in so doing. So this is the view of this is the source of the argument about opening cans of Coke or fish cans. It's cans of tuna. Now, there is a third issue over here, which is even if opening the utensil isn't a problem, is there a problem here of mechateich, of cutting? Now, the halacha is that mechateich, cutting, is only forbidden when one cuts to a specific size. The original nature of the malacha was when one produced leathers or skins, one would trim them to neaten the sides to create a straight edge and to produce a piece of cloth or parchment or whatever it may be of a particular size. Or perhaps a seamstress cutting a piece of cloth to a pattern, one is cutting with precision and care, and therefore this would be the malacha of mechateich. Does this apply when opening cans of tuna or Coke? And the answer is, again, a machlokas, an argument. Some places can say, yes, you are opening the tab because you want the cut to be care, so it will pour out smoothly. Others say you don't really open the tab for that reason. You open because it's etched and it's convenient and easy to open. You open the can of tuna in that manner because that's how tin openers work, and this is the easiest way to open them. And therefore, we do not need to be concerned about mechateich. So this is the background to the halachic discussion around these topics. First of all, one needs to work out, is there Makkeh BePatish over here? Am I creating a new utensil? And if it is a new utensil, is it a flimsy utensil or a permanent utensil? On the one hand, it's quite strong. I mean, a can of Coke is quite a structure. On the other hand, no one uses them again, and therefore would any of the allowances apply? This is the background to the different debates. For those who follow my personal psak, I don't know if everyone here are members of the shul or people who follow my personal psak, If you use a different Rav, then obviously you need to ask a shiur of them, but that contextualize what the shiur is. For those who ask the shiurs of me, I follow the view of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in this, who does not believe that either of the concerns apply. He does not believe that a can of Coke or a tin of tuna is a reasonable utensil. These are things that are discarded. He is also skeptical about the claim that opening them makes them into a utensil. They are already utensils, they're already storing things. They're simply sealed, and I'm opening them up. And therefore, he doesn't believe that that applies either. He doesn't believe that machatich applies because you're not tearing with precision. You just pull the tab over, open the tin of tuna. It happens to be that this opens with a smooth opening, and therefore Shlomo Zalman is lenient with all of these, and this isn't a concern. As an aside, can someone who is stringent open up for someone who is, rely on a bottle that is open for someone who is lenient? The answer is they couldn't ask them to do so, because if in their view this is indeed a malacha, you can't ask a fellow Jew to transgress Shabbos for your sake. However, if they do so, since they are relying upon a legitimate authority, and in addition, they have now already done so, and this doesn't prohibit the food because of that which has been done, one can now drink from the can of Coke that they have opened, or the tin of tuna, eat from the tin of tuna that they have opened. It is true that if someone does a melacha for you on Shabbos, you can't benefit from it in general, such as cooking, but that's because the melacha has created the object which I'm now enjoying. In this case, it has merely removed a barrier to accessing it, and in that case, therefore, I'm not positively benefiting from their transgression of Shabbos, and therefore, even if I believe this is a transgression of Shabbos, I can still benefit from them. And I've had the privilege on several occasions of being personally the Shabbos goy for those who are machmir, who are stringent, and opening bottles for people at simchas, because we follow in this opening these containers, because we follow the view of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman. Now, this is with cans of Coke and tins of tuna. There is a separate halachic discussion about opening bottles, because opening bottles, you are twisting the lid off, and interestingly, through doing so, creating, or arguably creating, the lid. And here we have to understand what the logic is behind this. So let's talk about a metal lid. So you have a bottle of grape juice with a metal lid. The way these are manufactured is that there is a smooth sheet of metal which is pressed onto each bottle as it goes past on the conveyor belt, shaping it and molding it round the lid. Now, each lid has a little ring perforated into the lid, and as I unscrew the lid for the first time, I break the lid off the ring and create a lid which can now be open and closed. And it has never previously been used as a lid, because it was created as a flat sheet of metal pressed down onto the top of the bottle. So it never had lid functionality. It now has become a lid because it can be opened and closed easily through so doing. In contrast, a plastic lid was already a lid, because the way they manufacture plastic lids is that they mold out of plastic lids, and then they press it down with force onto the bottle, so that when you open the lid for the first time, again, you break a perforated plastic to create a ring, but you're not creating a lid in so doing, because it was already functioning as a lid, because it was formed as a lid and then placed on the bottle. It was merely an inconvenient lid because of the ring, which has now become a more convenient lid because the ring is detached. So the difference between a metal lid and a plastic lid is that the plastic lid was already a lid put on the bottle. The metal lid was never a lid. It was a flat sheet of metal molded onto the bottle, and as soon as it came into existence in its molded form, it was already not openable unless one detached and broke the ring. So you end up here again with a similar halachic discussion. Point number one, is this a permanent lid of significance that's been created? Well, certainly with plastic bottles, probably yes. It's very common for people to reuse bottles of water or liquid, to keep them and to reuse them if they need to. These items which would be often reused, cans of Cokes and tins of tuna, simply aren't practical to use, and the opening of a can of Coke is not practical. The tin of tuna has had tuna in it, it's a little smelly, it's not worth rushing it up. Whereas bottles, people often reuse because of the openability of the lid. So you have indeed made something of usefulness through doing this. That's for the plastic lid. On the other hand, as we said, it was already a lid in the manufacturing process. The metal lid, I think it's pretty unusual for people to reuse glass wine bottles and with reusing the lids, in which case you would have a leniency there. On the other hand, as I explained, the lid is made through the manufacturing process. But then you end up with the same conceptual argument as before, which is the whole logic behind this correct? Is it true to say it wasn't a lid before you opened it for the first time? After all, it was functioning as a lid. I mean, that's what a lid is. A lid is something that keeps something closed. So is there a basis for the whole argument to say that this is creating a lid by opening it? And again, my personal psak is that of the Shmir Shabbos Kilchosa, Rav Neuvet, Rav Shlomo Zalman, and so on, in which they are not concerned with these situations, and therefore they allow one to do so. They don't believe that these are osa, and in our family, indeed, we open and close lids on the Shabbos, and are not concerned with this. I'll just use the 1 minute, the 60 seconds remaining, just to try and finish off opening, closing. Maybe I'll just discuss very briefly 2 more scenarios. The first scenario is opening cardboard containers, like a box of matzahs, for example. And here, the consensus is that even though one doesn't immediately discard them, because one empties the contents out slowly, and the box isn't destroyed by opening them, it remains a good box. Nonetheless, as long as it is a sort of fragile type of container like a matzah box, this would be allowed because it's only used temporarily, and pretty much as soon as the cardboard cereal or cardboard cereal box or matzah box is empty, one discards it. It's a pretty flimsy thing. If it's a good quality box, by the way, then there would be an issue over here. Of opening it up or ripping off the lid of this box, because indeed one is creating a box. If it's a sort of very solid cardboard box, this would be a problem. The final case I'll deal with in the time remaining is that of if you buy yogurts or chocolate puddings, or in Israel, Lebanon, in which they're attached to each other. We already discussed how detaching things could be Makkeh BePatish. Detaching chopsticks, which are stuck together, you are creating the chopsticks by breaking them apart. After shiur 2 weeks ago, someone gave me another scenario, which is toothpicks. Some toothpicks that you buy, all the toothpicks are attached together and you break off a toothpick to use. This would be Makkeh BePatish. Is it Makkeh BePatish to separate the yogurt containers? And the answer is no. Again, this would be allowed according to most poskim, because you're simply separating it for convenience. You could peel off the lid of the yogurt and eat them when it's attached to all its fellow yogurts. It's just inconvenient to do so, and therefore, again, this wouldn't be Makkeh BePatish. This wouldn't be Mechatech, because one doesn't have any interest, particularly in the tear, and therefore this would be neither Mechatech nor Makkeh BePatish, and therefore it would be completely mutter. I'll stop there for today, because we've dealt with a lot of halachas, and in Mi'at Hashem next week we will look at some of the other scenarios of Makkeh BePatish in the Drabanon world, and again we will discover how this is connected to swimming on Shabbos or not swimming on Shabbos. It's connected to toveling kelim on Shabbos, and it's connected to many other relevant halachas, musical instruments on Shabbos. We'll see how there's a whole range of halachas which are linked to Makkeh BePatish in a manner which we'll find a little interesting and unusual. So I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you so much as always for joining, and looking forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Can I ask a quick question?
Thank